Hi, I'm Michael Hartman,
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo, and this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by the Mo Pros. I'm your host, Michael Hartman. Flying solo today, which is all good. Mike and Naomi will be back soon, I'm sure. All right, for this episode, it's the first of a series that we're working on that is going to help educate our audience about some emerging go-to-market approaches and help provide guidance on how you as marketing ops professionals can be an enabler or an advocate even for some of these approaches at your organization. To join us in that conversation for this first one is Justin Gray. We're going to be talking about Nearbound go-to-market strategies. Justin is an award-winning 5-time entrepreneur who has made a career of launching and scaling companies and guiding them to successful exits of over $250 million in 2018. He started angel investing to make strategic investments in founders he believes in and is currently a limited partner in several funds. He is now also co-founder and managing director of In Revenue Capital, where he couples go-to-market expertise with venture funding to empower seed-stage founders in their startups through a first-of-its-kind model called Operator-Immersive Capital. He is a strong voice for pragmatic entrepreneurship, partner-led growth, and building intentional performance culture, and is a recognized speaker and thought leader. And he has presented at top industry conferences and published over 500 times in publications. So, wow on that. So, Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, that's a lot of intro to live up to. I'll try to not follow my face here. Thanks for having me.
No, it'll be good. We're gentle, so we try to be. So I think one of the things we're going to need to do for a lot of these, if our audience is like me, some of these terms that are going to be used in these new approaches are new. And if you're like me, you make assumptions about what they all mean, but I don't want to do that. So, so this idea of nearbound go-to-market strategy, maybe it would be helpful for you to just give a thumbnail sketch of what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because there's so many terms that people are using for, this partner-led, nearbound, partner ecosystem. I would say it's just, everything revolves around relationships. And so if you look at what's going on these days with, what's been called inbound, outbound, the reason I do like the nearbound term is it lends itself to an application across all of those traditional go-to-market strategies. So you're not giving up, any of the motions that, we've been running for the past, 2 decades, but you're doing that in a more intentional manner to get access to relationships. And so I really do think about, nearbound as fundamentally as access to relationships. And of course that comes predominantly through partners.
Is it, part of this feels a little bit like the way things were when I first got into the formal work world, and that relationships seems like they were really important back then too. And it was it was all people had the old thing was salespeople had their Rolodex, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it going is a little bit like going back to what some of those fundamentals, or is it something new now?
I think that it's fundamentally a recognition that all these gimmicky things that, marketers have been, gravitating towards for the last 10, 15, 20 years under the heading of digital marketing, those cycles of success are getting shorter and shorter. So it used to be you could put out an email blast and oh my God, an email that's tailored to who I am and my preferences, and I'm going to respond to that. Now everyone's flooded with email. You're flooded across all these channels, content, and so on. And so I do think it's coming back and recognizing that, when people buy, they are looking to gain trust, and the best way to do that is through someone that has already, served them in the past. They understand their needs, they understand where the pains are, and they can kind of guide you in that process. But it's also coupling that with a lot of these, newer tactics and strategies. So the example is, am I going to do targeted outbound, in a nearbound strategy? Absolutely. But why wouldn't I start, rather than a cold list, why wouldn't I start with a list that I've curated with one of my partners. I understand again the pain points of the folks, within that segment, and I can intelligently leverage that relationship, my message, my understanding of that organization. So it just makes everything, in my opinion, more intelligent, quite frankly. So that's why I do like thinking about it as an overlay for inbound, for outbound, for content marketing, for target account marketing or ABM, whatever you want to call it. It's just understanding how you can get access to relationships and information, and then informing those strategies as a result.
No, that's good. You hinted, I think, a little bit at some of the drivers behind this. You talked about the decreasing effectiveness of some digital channels, for example. Right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the major things? Maybe there are others beyond that you say are drivers that led you and others to get to this model of nearbound
I
go-to-market
mean, I think
strategies.
just fundamentally, no one is buying something unless it means a multiplier for their business, right? Like you're seeing a lot fewer experiments being run out there. Like everything is about value, and it's about understanding what that value is going to be, and it has to be an order of magnitude in order for someone to make that decision. Like folks just aren't spending in the way that they have been in the past. That's of course fueled by this whole efficient growth kind of movement and so on, which is really just a guise for good business. Why would you invest in something unless you had a really strong understanding that that was going to be meaningful for your organization? And so, how do you get a window into that? That again, I think is best served through relationships and getting access to folks in a way where you understand what they need already. You can kind of bring that value forward because you can put together a business case, an ROI model, you can show them that value up front, maybe even using the solution that you're selling. And so it's demonstrative, right? And it's really difficult to make that investment on the selling side if you don't have that same understanding of fit and of mutual value and so on. So it really does inform both sides of that. But to your point, the very superficial spray and pray type method just isn't yielding any result, and so you have to look elsewhere to grow a business.
Yeah, it's interesting because the word that kind of keeps coming up when I've talked to you and others is this word of trust, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
truly important. And having been a buyer more than a seller in my career, like I think when I've found trusted people, I'm more likely to move forward, or at least I have a very we have a honest conversation. I mean, my take on trust, though, is it's really hard to develop it. Right, you have to put
Yep.
an investment in it, and it's really easy to lose it. Right, and so to me, this then has implications on how on the timing and the timeline for getting the value back for investing in those building those trusted relationships. So are you
Sure.
also seeing changes in how people should, or are you suggesting people make changes in how they're measuring the effectiveness of these strategies?
Yeah, I think fundamentally you have to change how you're measuring these strategies. Like you can't just put a blanket of digital ads out there, or email blasts and nurture and so on, and then expect a straight line ROI around that. And so partnership and Nearbound really starts with developing those partnerships at the onset, and that in and of itself takes time, right? Like you have to evaluate your customer. You have to understand who else is serving them. You have to understand who's has access to your buyer. Then you have to find fit between your organization and their organization. There's some runway involved there, certainly. And I think that's what we see day in, day out as we work with our portfolio companies, because these are all very early stage organizations, right? Like they don't have massive brands in the space. And so getting them to understand that fundamentally this is going to take some time and investment. But normally, even within that investment period, you can start to see some opportunity precipitate. Like it's not uncommon
Sure.
if you understand like, hey, who those great partners are, and you get access to multiple layers within the org, the partner team, the executive team, the selling team. It's not uncommon to walk out of even those first couple meetings with some potential joint opportunities that are very
Sure.
real and very near term. So I think you have to look at that, through two lenses. You have to always be mining for that near term stuff, but you can't forgo that, or you can't forgo the longer term just for the sake of that, that immediate gratification.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it feels like there needs to be a mix of both quantitative and qualitative metrics, right? So there's, I
Yeah,
think
and
there's,
that's why it's it's frankly so difficult to run these programs without the participation of the executive team, without the buy-in of the CEO, because there is certainly going to be some qualitative and quantitative involved, and a lot of that is just being close to that relationship and kind of seeing that momentum build.
It's interesting. It just popped in my head. My wife does fundraising and volunteer stuff quite a bit, and now vocationally she's doing it. And I know that one of the things she is really, really good at is providing value to potential donors or existing donors and things like that. And it feels like it's a similar thing, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
building that relationship and the connections between relationships to others and taking advantage of, not advantage of it, taking advantage of
Leveraging.
those,
Yeah.
leveraging those. Yeah. I think that's an interesting overone. I think the allure of digital marketing solutions has been that the metrics were easy to come by and you could show
Sure.
immediate impact. And I think that's the danger. The downside has been that you get very short-sighted
Right.
on, yeah. Um, so you wrote an article, and thanks for sharing this with me in Wired magazine sometime last year in 2023. And one of the things that really caught my attention, you started alluding to it when you talked about the buy-in of the organization, that there is, for this kind of approach to be really successful, it probably needs to be embedded in the whole process of how you build your organization in terms of the people. So
Mm-hmm.
hiring, onboarding, retaining, recruiting, like all those things. Like how, like, is that something you feel strongly is a part of that? And like, how would you suggest, like, how do you think that needs to come to life in these organizations when they're taking this kind of strategy on?
Yeah, I mean, so even if you think about understanding who your best partners are going to be, right? Like you have to think about that across the buying journey. And so, the anecdote here is, so I used to run a digital marketing go-to-market consultancy, and our primary go-to-market motion was through our software partners. Not all of those software partners were going to be, focused on their net new acquisition. So we weren't always co-selling, for net new logos. Oftentimes we were looking at, the maturity on those platforms. What were their pain points? Churn was a very common pain point, and so we could prescribe our services later within that buying journey to where someone was, under a CSM, they were being serviced by a customer success team, and that team was, managing 250 to 500 logos at one time. Really difficult to be effective and be an expert when you've got a 20 something CS rep trying to like manage off a red, green, yellow type of dashboard, right? Like what are they ultimately going to prescribe that is going to be meaningful to that customer? And so it was a really great relationship, where we'd find those pain points. Maybe someone's pain point, to the top of funnel point was like, we just need to acquire new logos. We needed access to trust, and we could help them in that manner. But more often it was, we need people to find real value within our solution. Can you design services? Can you enable our CS team? What are those particular measures that are going to be impactful to them, and really zoning in, making those KPIs our KPIs. So I think when you're evaluating partnerships, you can't get so myopic, which I feel like so many organizations do in terms of like, acquisition or source, quote unquote sourced revenue. That tends to be like the very shiny object that kills a ton of partnerships. If you can avoid looking at something through that, very myopic lens, and understand, all right, where could this partner influence my customer along the journey we want them to take, and align those partnerships correctly, it's so much more impactful. And that really is it's a necessity to involve, not only the entire team, but again, I mentioned the executive team, because oftentimes partnership teams are spun up to do one thing, and that's drive net new revenues. And unfortunately, that's not where the value in all partnerships resides.
So do you think when you say, I mean, it feels like that this has implications all the way up and down and across an organization. Like it could even
Totally.
play into roles, that are not strictly go to market.
Product,
Yeah,
right?
product, finance, maybe operations.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's interactions with those clients or prospects in any place, right, you want that to continue to be building trust.
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of MarketingOps.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At marketingops.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the partner really becomes your, first order customer, right? And to your point earlier, like you've got to be managing those relationships. You've got to some of our most successful go-to-market investment was sponsoring all the RKOs and SKOs of our partners, right? Like we were right there talking to their sellers, their CS folks, like what are their key initiatives for that year, what KPIs are they looking to drive, what joint clients do we share, what joint prospects do we share, and really we'd have an unfiltered audience right to the folks that mattered the most. And so a lot of that investment, that's not tied directly to an individual sales cycle. That's tied to fostering that relationship and to treating those folks like our customers. And, again, that's where most of this motion starts, which is fostering those relationships.
Sure.
So that you can sell that one to get access to many on the back end.
Right. Yeah. So, do you think that there needs to be a little, I mean, first off, I think the whole process for hiring is kind of broken a lot of ways. I don't know
Sure.
that I don't know that I have any solutions or ideas for how to fix it, because it's sort of just some fundamental things in the way that things happen. But I do it does feel like there's probably some things that need to be incorporated into the companies want to have this kind of strategy in terms of how what are some of the maybe soft skills and things like that they're looking for in people they hire across the organization. Do you think that HR and talent teams can adapt to some of this stuff?
Well, I think first and foremost, I want to say that I don't agree with lighting up a traditional partner team in order to create a Nearbound motion. I think it fundamentally starts with the teams that are already in place, with your sellers, with your customer success folks, with your marketers. Those folks have to learn how to enable and run partner-led motions. And I think to your point earlier on, hey, a lot of this stuff sounds like very traditional selling. Really good sellers are already doing this stuff.
Sure.
And so, it really is about threading that, across the rest of the organization. Can they do that now enabled, with marketing? Can they do that and leverage partners for successful handoffs to CS folks and so on? But once you've built up some of that DNA and you start to see some of that return, then most times it necessitates that we spin up a team that really is focused on this 24/7. And to that point, yeah, you have to do. I think HR, I'm not a big fan of HR running any hiring process. I'm a big fan of those hiring processes being informed by the direct team and direct managers, and even the direct relationships that they have. So hiring from partners, hiring from other vendors is a really successful strategy. But I think if they're involved and they know what it looks like, and they can kind of suss that out within those candidates that maybe have been doing that, pieces of that on their own, or maybe even doing it successfully in teams at scale, you're going to be able to see their perspective kind of come to light. The thing I hear most often when I talk to people about partnerships in a hiring capacity is well, I'm looking to learn, the partner stuff from you guys. It sounds really interesting. It's all right, great. Well, that's not the best candidate for this role. I'm really looking for someone that can tell me stories about how they've gone out and forged relationships on their own because they knew it was going to provide them access and provide them success towards the metrics that all sellers are engaged by, which is, of course, bookings and revenue.
Right. Yeah. I think you already had something provocative. We're going to get, all the HR folks out there are going to come after us now. But that's all right.
They're already after me. I'm pretty vocal on LinkedIn about it.
Okay. So since our audience is, primarily marketing ops, revenue ops folks, what do you think the biggest challenges or benefits that might accrue from this for marketing ops leaders and practitioners if they're either advocating for or being asked to support a Nearbound approach?
Yeah. So if you think about, partnerships and relationships, what's the biggest challenge to these programs, even once they get off the ground? And that's that it traditionally resides in someone's head. And so if you can take that information out of someone's head and put it into systems so that you can really, so I'll even zoom back. Like, so let's say that you have no, partner motion whatsoever. You don't have any partners. You're a very new organization. Like the first thing that you're going to want to see is what are our customers using? Like who are they engaged with out there? And where do you go to look for that? Like probably not within your systems of record or your CRM. Like that's the fundamental change that needs to happen. So I'm a big proponent of partner attach across all of critical systems, certainly CRM and any marketing tools, marketing automation, whatever it happens to be. If you think about your database as a window into relationships and you can operationalize that, that becomes the absolute critical. It becomes the focal point for driving success within these programs. Because the first thing you're going to want to know is, all right, who out there has access to my target account, my ICP, and how, are they selling to the same buying centers that I want to sell into? Again, like most people are going to start going, online to LinkedIn, to different data, technographic data sources to figure all that out. If you can bring partner attach as a centerpiece to all of your systems of record, that then becomes your window into, okay, our 15 best customers are all leveraging these two partners. Well, that's a pretty good place to start from a partnership standpoint. And then certainly as your sellers are selling and your marketers are going to market, like that segmentation is going to be what drives their campaigns because what it is that people are doing with that partner, the value that they're getting, how your solution bolts into theirs and makes a 1 + 1 = 10 type situation. So we have to be able to understand, where the relationships are within our prospect and in our customer base. So that partner attach aspect, and as far as I've seen, no system is doing that out of the box. And so I think that's up to RevOps folks and marketing ops folks to build that functionality and keep that data fresh, because that should be what is informing every single campaign and every single go-to-market motion that we run.
So when you say partner attach, I think what you're saying is capturing what partners are involved with what target or
it's that one-to-many relationship, right? We used to build it in a partner's custom object in Salesforce because we were Salesforce users, right? And we would tag all of our, on a yearly basis at minimum, we'd refresh our TAM and ICP. And then as the nearest neighbor, it was, all right, what partners are they using, right? Like which of our partners, which technologies across the landscape, what other consulting firms, analyst firms, whatever it happens to be. The more information we had there, you could immediately look at an account and say, oh, well, I've got relationships with 3 of their tightest vendors. That's where I'm going to go to start informing how I'm going to sell into that organization. So that visibility is just critical.
Yeah. So to play the skeptic a little bit, how do you build an incentive for people to make sure that is updated and accurate in those systems? I mean, I go back to, at least I think most marketing ops folks would say that, and probably revenue ops too, sales ops would, that you expect getting salespeople just to maintain opportunity data is a struggle, keeping it consistent. So this seems like an extra bit. I could see the value downstream, but how do you get them to see it?
Well, I think if everyone is incentivized around, some visibility into bookings, and that varies with people's roles and so on. And I think if you've run, and this is like at the very granular what we go through with our portcos, like we will actually, get embedded with them. We will forge these partner relationships, and then we'll run some cycles. and we will show them explicitly how much more successful those partner involved cycles are than some cold outbound campaign or even someone that comes in through the website, because you know so much more about that buyer and that organization and how they buy. Like, what was their procurement process like? Who was on the buying committee? Am I selling to the right individual? All that information is informed by partners. And once you start to see the success and the velocity and the deal size and all the metrics that we want to measure grow in the positive direction, it naturally creates that, like, when I know this, it makes my job easier.
Yeah.
And you almost have to kind of go around to each one of those departments and show them that that win, and then that behavior comes along with it. But you also incentivize people to build things that scale. So, like, our technographic partners, we actually had a system that would, we used a data provider to bring that into the system. Anytime we saw that tag, it actually, through automation, attached the right partner. And so it wasn't about, like, having to do all these data imports and so on. Like, we created automation and created scale with those systems. But it was because fundamentally people saw that, like, 80% of our revenue is being driven by partners. And when they're involved, we've got better clients, we've got larger deals, we've got, windows into what we want to sell them next. And so it just really becomes a cultural touchstone at the center. And then all of the right behaviors really stem from the fact that people are seeing success in this area, and often in a big way.
Yeah, it feels like this should inform operations teams about, rather than focusing on just pure metrics, right? How do we enable the sellers and the other marketers' jobs to be easier by, whether it's through automation? So it's more about enabling them to be more efficient and better, as opposed to just, I mean, there's an accountability piece that still needs to be there, but it feels like it might change your priorities on what you do in terms of evolving your systems and technology stack.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love attaching, ops folks, rev ops, marketing ops, whatever we want to call it, to pipeline metrics, to bookings metrics, right? Like, fundamentally what you're doing should be informing those motions. Like, you're largely in a support motion, and you are supporting sales, and you're supporting demand gen, right? And so the more we can tie people to success and drive the incentive for the right behaviors, and again, you get visibility into, wow, this stuff's really working. That tends to be the kind of light bulb moment that I see out there.
Yeah, I mean, and the model you described made me think about. I had a role at one point where I had mostly marketing ops, but I also had a small inbound team for a while, and it was that whole idea was new at this company, very sales relationship driven business.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one sales leader I had heard through the grapevine was really not. He was kind of undermining what we were doing for lead qualification and routing, and didn't think that it was going to add much value. So I went through that exercise of looking at the deals that went through to his team through that versus those that didn't, and looked at the difference in the velocity, the average deal size, close percentage, close won percentage, things like that. Eventually, that person became the biggest advocate, right? Because I think it then saw the value of it.
And to the point earlier about partner attach, everyone asks me, like, what are the new metrics? What are the new, like, KPIs that organizations need to be measuring with, a Nearbound, a partner-led approach? And my answer is always the same. Everything you're measuring right now, but through the lens of that partner involvement, right? Like, when we have 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it is, partners attached to that prospect, how is that performing? How is it, what is the our deal sources? What does our opportunity pipeline look like? What's the velocity look like there? What's the booking success? What is the customer NPS? Like, you could follow this all the way through to every single metric that we already measure. But when you're able to segment that by the involvement of partners, and then even better, the co-selling motions with partners. All right, great, they've got 4 of our partners that we can leverage from an insight perspective, but we're actually co-selling with 2 of them into that deal. How does that, affect all of those metrics? The results are, I've never seen those results be a negative. So it's always, a lift, because you just know more about that buyer. And again, you're kind of, in proximity, you're catching some of that trust, that goodwill, because someone right alongside you saying, hey, trust these folks, like, their solution really works. We've seen this at X, Y, and Z corporation, so on and so forth. So the same thing that relationship sellers are doing, we're really looking to do that at scale. And that's what some of these operational components can really enable.
Yeah. So curious. I think the majority of this is probably will make a lot of sense for people who are in, say, tech companies.
Mhm.
Do you think do you think this would work as well in non-tech companies, maybe sort of pure B2B product companies where they're baking widgets or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of hinted at the product aspect earlier. So, like, one of our partners was very early sales loft and like ran product over there, ran partnerships. Like, if you can understand, what your prospects are using from a technology perspective, how your technology integrates with that, what the gaps are there, like what are customers looking to do, that can inform your product roadmap. It informs, how you bring that product to market. There's really no aspect of a business that relationships and trust wouldn't better enable. And so you just have to figure out, it all centers around the customer. What do they need? What are they using? Where are they looking to get solutions to those pain points? How do you fit in? How do the partners fit in? What is that gap? What's left over, right? Like, and how do you come together to fill that gap? So I think if you're placing the customer at the center of things and really using them as a proxy for who you should be partnered with, and how your joint value prop together serves those organizations, it can inform any aspect of that buying cycle, any industry, any vertical, as long as it's centered and kind of linchpinned by the customer.
So, do you think of so this podcast is linked to the marketingops.com community, right? So do you think there's a place for communities in this ecosystem as well? Do you think of them as partners, or is it another step in kind of the network of
Yeah,
places where you can build relationships?
yeah. I mean, I'll go back to the Lead MD example, which again was my consultancy. Like, we looked at communities like this. In fact, we looked at this exact community as a partner relationship, and something that when we participate in, we get access to a ton of folks that frankly are always involved in our buying committee. What relationships do you have? I'll throw Rizzo under the bus. Like, I've reached out to him many times, like, hey, how can we get access to this organization? I see they're a sponsor, or I see they're speaking. You know what I mean? Like, you really start to think about anyone who's serving your same customer that has access to the buying committee that is involved in your sale, and leverage those relationships. It's just all about being pragmatic in that regard. So I don't see too many relationships that wouldn't be effective within this motion. We ran that with an analyst firm called Topo for years, because they were getting in, they were understanding the pains of an organization, and they could source someone directly to us. They'd say, "Oh, you need that. These guys do that really well." And so it doesn't have to be a tech partner. Certainly, it doesn't have to be a services partner. There's a lot of other opportunities out there if you just understand where your customer is going and who they trust.
Yeah, I mean, there's this the power of these communities is like I've been involved now with several, and if I tell Rizzo all the time, right? I think if something like this been around 20 years ago, when I was first getting into some of this stuff, who knows where
I
we'd
mean,
be.
it is a trust circle, right? Like, I've seen, some of the stuff that you guys do in terms of, oh, here's a recommended platform. Here's my best practices on that platform, right? Like, if you understand where, your customers are actually advocating for you, and you can leverage that advocacy, like, that's incredibly powerful. So, and that's just, again, like, looking out and being really insightful around who's talking about you, what value are they finding, what customers are leveraging you and seeing results, and then starting to serve those individuals as part of your go-to-market motion.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of going back to our core audience of marketing op folks, if they're listening to this now and they're like, this model seems like it would work with my organization, like what would you recommend to them to do to help maybe drive some change and or at least consideration of this kind of approach, and then start to maybe, I don't know, does it make sense to pilot it? Do you need to go all in? Like, how do you think it? Do you have any best practices, for lack of a better term, on how to start adopting this within an organization?
Yeah, so kind of playing off what we mentioned earlier, like with our organizations, we'd love to for this to happen or start at the grassroots level, right? And so if you are in a RevOps marketing ops role, and you can start this kind of mini pilot with a couple of your best sellers. Who are they seeing, in your joint customers? Who's serving that same buying committee? And then start some of those partnership conversations, kind of put together this little, SWAT team. And we're doing this right now with some folks on a selling team and some folks on a marketing team. And they've gone out and they've located two potential like great partners. And then we're helping them navigate those conversations. And the first thing we want to do is, match them up with their counterparts within those orgs. So seller to seller, marketer to marketer. Hey, this is our theory. Who should we run this with? Who are a couple of your customers? Who are a couple of our customers that are not, already customers of the other party, and run those couple cycles. And I guarantee if you're doing this in a way that where you understand the value prop between those two potential partners, like what is the real value that we're bringing to market, those then will become great case studies that you can then bring up to your executive team. And we do this all the time. Like, hey, what are just a couple customers that you have great relationships with that we can co-sell together? And then once that deal, we start to see those precipitate into opportunities and we see some success within those deals, then use that as fodder to bring up to the executive team on their side, the executive team on your side, get them excited about those results. And now we can push this down in more of a comprehensive manner. But everyone always wants to start at the top. Let's go sign a bunch of agreements. That's where stuff gets, spun off into no man's land pretty quickly. So if you can find some things at the grassroots level and see success there, that success, certainly within this environment where everyone's struggling to book revenue, like everyone's down in terms of sales numbers, and you can come to them with an idea that's actually proven, that really creates momentum within these areas.
You mentioned case studies, and I think what you're suggesting is people sort of develop their own case study within the organization. But are there enough examples of companies now doing this that are could be a case study to help even get that ball rolling to develop something internally that people can go to?
Sure. I mean, I guess it depends on. I find those are good supporting materials, so I'd still recommend doing this in a grassroots motion, and then look at what Microsoft is investing within their partner channel. Like a lot of big organizations are like doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on partner-led growth. You can bring in those kind of ancillary data points, but nothing's more powerful than saying like, hey, we just closed a great deal, and the only reason that we closed that is we involved this partner. Got a great relationship with their seller. We were able to understand these key points. Here's our joint value prop. Here's why the customer cares about it. And look at the revenue that we just generated. So certainly, and I mean, all you have to do is just go on LinkedIn and search, partner ecosystem, and you'll see plenty of folks out there like making investments and talking about success in this area. But brass tacks is pretty hard to argue with.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I was kind of smiling a little bit because we've talked in and out a little bit about metrics here throughout this conversation. And what you just described to me is what I think ultimately, and ironically, marketers have missed a lot in the last decade or so, which is talking about their impact in storytelling ways, right? So
Totally.
like, storytelling has so much power over people and how they think about things. And that's not to say data and metrics aren't important, but they don't always sway people.
Yeah, how you present those data. I mean, just ask anyone who's walked an attribution model into a board meeting, like how unsuccessful that is.
Just duck right away. Yeah.
Right. Like without a narrative and a story to support that. I mean, obviously, like storytelling is largely how we sell. And that's a great point on partner led as well on Nearbound is, those stories are what's captivating that audience, right? Like here's how 1 + 1 = 10 and so on. So you have to, that's what I mean by like value propositions. Like really, what is the story that you're telling together that is just so compelling that's going to open that door? It's going to, gain you trust. But that applies to anything, branding or storytelling, presenting analytics or storytelling. Like, hey, let me really walk you through how we acquired this, flagship customer. That will get a lot more, that lands a lot better than trying to show someone a report and say, hey, go ahead and consume this.
Yeah, I totally going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I'm still a fan of attribution reporting, just not the way it's been used in a lot of places. And I think what I've gravitated towards is that's great for marketers to continue to use if you're
Hmm.
doing traditional stuff to help you figure out where to place bets. On the flip side, if you're going to go to a board meeting or senior exec meeting, depending on the size of the company, yeah, digging into wins and losses and then back, building the story about how that happened is going to be much more powerful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So, so we've covered quite a bit of ground here. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about, or we haven't covered yet, that you think is really important that our audience would need to know about for Nearbound?
I think, we kind of touched on it, but like that value proposition, how you articulate that to the customer has to be value forward. Like they have to be able to experience what the benefit of your solution is going to be. And so like that's one of the areas that we always focus on when building new partner teams is, first and foremost, understanding that value, right? Like, so I'll give an example. Like we've got a Portco that is a software tool. It's vertically focused, as all of our Portcos are, on the physician space, on the healthcare space. They basically, if you guys are familiar with like Spiff, or any of the sales compensation tools, they are compensation for doctors, right? Like very verticalized. Their best partner channel, it turns out, is there are these massive consultancies that operate in the healthcare space that design comp plans for large healthcare systems, right?
Mm.
So this is literally how we piece together this partner approach. Like, oh, really? So what are their pains? Well, their pains are they put together these huge complex models, they turn them over to a large healthcare system, and what do? Someone in that org tries to build it into a spreadsheet. It's incredibly error prone. There's no
Oh yeah.
visibility from the doctor's standpoint. There's no visibility from the consultancy who assembled that comp plan. And at the end of the day, they don't know if they're driving the strategic initiatives that the organization is trying to foster. Are they, moving more towards value-based care, so on and so forth? Is patient NPS rising? Like, we can't see any of that stuff because it's all in a spreadsheet. So there's a number of like really acute pain and value points tied to this. Being able to then bring that into an ROI model that's informed by the thousands of customers that these consultancies have served over the years really enabled this particular Portco of ours to leverage a very believable, very relevant business case. So we put this together with the partner. We shop that out to a couple of prospects. Like, hey, right now, I'm talking as the consulting partner. Like when we hand you this, comp plan every 2 to 5 years, what do you do with it? Are you seeing these same pain points that we're experiencing out there? Yeah, and here we put together a model already based on your organization, because again, this consulting partner knows about their clients at a very deep level. We're able to put together that business case for them right there. Like on average, they're saving 7 figures plus in errors and in headcount that they're throwing towards, trying to compute these manual spreadsheets. So like
Sure.
that all needs to be wrapped in a story, but like that ROI model has been incredibly impactful and incredibly effective there. So I would say that is the area that most people neglect here, along with several others. But like it's so critical that you nail that value proposition and that you can articulate it to a client in a language and with impact that matters. So like that's just a critical area in seeing success. And certainly if you're doing that in that grassroots method that we mentioned, if you're taking that to an executive, it's going to enable that conversation, tenfold. So really important to nail down.
Yes. In that example, it sounds like these consultancies have a good practice, but they're potentially at risk if these companies can't then turn it into an actionable thing to do. And then, so what you're providing them is a solution to that for the partner and ultimately to those
And it's
healthcare
also
providers,
just
right?
not to get too far correct, but not to get too far down this tangent, but like it's also a proactive biz dev tool for them because they can see, they know what the organization's trying to do. They can see whether their compensation is driving that in terms of behavior, and they
Mm-hmm.
can actually, hop in earlier than what would normally be like a 2 to 5 year cycle. They can come in at, the 18-month mark. Hey, we actually think you should try this new thing. And so it's a business generator for them. Obviously, we're doing a rev share for them, so they create a tail of revenue as well. I mean, it's a win-win-win all around. So I know it's a very specific example, but all of that came about by understanding the customer, understanding who they were working with, and who is our nearest neighbor within the sales cycle that we wanted to run.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point that I don't think I had picked up on. It's not just solving your end customers' pain points, right, with your product or solution. in this approach, you also want to do that in a way that with those partners, you may be helping them
Has to
be more
be.
as well. Okay, so
Has
that's
to be.
yeah. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense as well. So wow.
Yeah, just a quick anecdote on that. So, like, Marketo was my number one partner for over a decade, right? That didn't happen because we were doing great things for their customer. I'm sure they liked that happening, but sellers aren't going to bring you in just
Right.
to do the right thing every time. It would be a great fairy tale if that were to happen. They brought us in because we spoke CMO really well, and we could sell to rooms of executives where a typical software sales rep could not. And so we would bring in benchmarks, we would bring in, business cases, we would help them. We were essentially their value engineering team for free, something that they didn't have access to unless the deal size was astronomical. So it was solving that acute pain point on their side to get access to a customer that we could better solve pains for. The value chain there is incredibly important.
Yeah. So, and that's another piece that I think is worth highlighting, which is, yeah, you're not just looking for them to provide you value. You need to provide value to those partners to whether it's,
Absolutely.
avoiding risk or whatever. Yeah. Okay. It makes a ton of sense, right? And again, like if some of this still feels like kind of going back to old school models, but at the same time, clearly technology's evolved and there's ways. I like the idea of um, partner attach. Is that what you called it? Partner attach? Yeah, I
Yep.
think like being able to capture that. I can see how that would add a lot of value too, and understanding what's
Yeah, I mean,
been
you
effective
can
or not.
leverage all of your modern, B2B go to market tools, right? But why wouldn't I want to market to a universe that I know something about already, that I have a door open into already, right? Like, so it really just becomes a way to frame, those audiences and those segments through an inbound, through an outbound, through a content, like whatever model you're going to market with. That knowledge is going to make that model better.
Yeah, love it. Hey, this has been great, Justin. I really appreciate it. If yeah, is there anything that our folks can do to our listeners can do to keep up with you, what you're doing within revenue or Nearbound in general?
Yeah, so all of our content that we put out in revenue is go to market focused. So I think you'll probably find a lot of value there. Hit our site in revenue.capital or in revenue.com works too. Our newsletter's there, our podcast is there. We give away a ton of content for free. Anyone wants to get a hold of me, hit me up on LinkedIn, very active on that channel. And yeah, I appreciate the having me on today.
Yeah, it was great. Well, I'm glad we were able to get this in. I know your schedule's tight, so I appreciate you carving out the time. So thanks again, Justin, for joining us. Thanks to all our listeners for continuing to support us, and we will be back with another episode soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.